All right, welcome all to this journey of sorts today where we talk about design-led approach to customer-driven transformation. We'll just give another minute before we kickstart. And thank you all for joining the conversation today. And looking forward to having an engaging discussion on this very enticing topic. All right, in the interest of time, and thank you all for joining the conversations. At the very outset, I just want to take a minute and call out to all my attendees today. I hope you and your families are safe and doing extremely well. I hope and wish you and your near ones are equally doing well as well. Now, the topic today and the discussion of our is taking a design-led approach to customer-driven transformation. But a fundamental question that arises, is this a one-stop magic or it is a journey? Obviously, when we talk about transformation, transformation is a journey of sorts. And let's get into this journey to understand what can you do in this journey? How do you achieve the success? And what success looks like, right? And with that, I am Priyanka Padia, who's been looking at engineering and recently appreciating why design first and design-led customer-driven transformation becomes so very effective in bringing out the best experiences to your products, to your customers in general. So I started my journey obviously being a community evangelist with Adobe, as well as being a co-founder of an initiative within the PHP community called PHP Camp. And soon after, worked with product companies as well as BFSI clients like Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse. And then eventually, as working through these organizations, started appreciating that engineering has its own play, but it's equally important to understand why am I solving a problem and what is the driver of the problem. And when you get down to the why aspect of it, and when we bring about the topic of design, design is just not what it looks, it's about how it works. And if it's about how it works, there has to be some science around it. And that's when I started establishing and understanding the value of design and why design brings such a key, why design plays such a key factor in engineering the right solution, engineering the right product, etc., etc. And that's when I joined Accolite to head up the entire product and technology transformation as we embark on this journey at Accolite Digital. Now, obviously, we've had these discussions. Everyone says we need to focus on who your customer is, what your customer needs are, why you're building what you're building, right? Be in their shoes. These are things said again and again. But there is a point where we need to focus on and understand that we're now talking about experiences. The digital world demands experiences rather than products. Products that work in its own siloed function are no longer acceptable. And hence that experience needs to be coached, needs to be driven, needs to be implemented. But how do you really do that? And hence some of the philosophies that we're discussing today and some of the rules, tips, tricks that we're discussing are not anything new. It's just that we need to give it a bigger and a wider focus from an experience perspective that says design-led transformation begins at the heart of figuring out what experiences look like. And in that spirit, the first question that arises that how do companies essentially deliver exceptional designs? Why do they do it launch after launch? And how do they actually make things work? But what is design worth? At the same time, if you look at examples, you will find examples taken. You look at examples such as the Swiss Army knife. Look at example of Google homepage, and look at example of the Disney experience. All these talk about one fundamental aspect, that is experience. Experience that is agnostic, experience that brings in value to customers, because at the end, the products are leveraged when the experience connects, not just the product, but the larger ecosystem. And what we've all come off yesterday is the Apple's For Out event, where we called out we all observed what Dynamic Island looks like. Correct? So these are experiences that we are engaging on, but there is science. I keep saying that there's science behind how you do it and why and what would be your journey looking like essentially, because it's not a magic wand that you say that, hey, today I start and tomorrow I get it. But then a fundamental question comes is, while we talk about design and what it is worth, what is design? What is the value of design that we really want to focus on? And in this spirit, I actually stumbled upon one fantastic article by McKinsey, which was published some time back. And in just what this calls out is the value of design really begins when you start thinking about design more more than product. Think about it as a user experience. But then for that experience to be built, it needs to be iterative. And hence, if it needs to be iterative, you can't keep it siloed in one function of your group or in one function of your division. And all of this, when you bring it together, you have to make sure that your designs are measurable. You're measuring against time, you're measuring against cost. What are those costs? Right? So this wheel of experience and the wheel of value from a design perspective helps us build three fundamental pillars, or rather four fundamental pillars of sorts. The experience, which is not siloed, which brings the empathy. And when I say empathy, I'm not talking about sympathy, folks. The feeling of what you need and understanding why you need what you need is very pivotal. And that's where these four quadrants that we're discussing today help you define the value of design and eventually help you move on your journey. And we're going to be leveraging these philosophies and help you build some rules and tricks and tips, as I said. And I'm going to be able to share those tricks as we've worked on this journey together. Right. Moving on. While we know the value of design, we also need to appreciate what are the leaders talking about from challenges perspective, right? What are your challenges? What we have observed those challenges. Right? People are generally believing that there is a need when it comes into cross-functional talent, there's a need to make sure we bring design across different silos. When we talk about the analytical aspects, we're looking at how do we measure design? Is there a design matrix? Is there a design maturity that we can get into? At the same time, when we talk about user experience, do you really start with the user first? Or do you start with the product first? Do you start understanding what your product is, does not? Or do you just jump into features? What it is, right? And all these weaknesses that the leaders have identified will only help us appreciate why we need to take a step back and identify who are you solving this problem for? What are their ethos? What are their motives? And what are their emotions? Because emotions drives usability in some ways. Okay? And in that spirit, as I said, it's the user experience first. We are talking about organizations that bring in user experience have far more impact from a product perspective, right? But at the same time, I'll give you one example of it, right? What happens is, take an example of Netflix. So there is a fantastic case study where ready-made homemade meals is talk of the town in many, I would say, countries in general. And here is Netflix looking at experience to see when a particular person is binge watching, right? Or a working person is binge watching, midway during the break or midway in this process or in this experience, there is a widget that comes up and says, hey, would you like to order a homemade meal? Or would you like to order a pre-made meal of sorts? Now that experience is not Netflix. It's looking at the holistic dimension of you watching a movie or you watching a particular series, and in the series, in the journey, you wanting to get everything imbibed in that entire product itself. That experience that gives you an capability to order as well as pay through Google Pay or an Apple Pay, all of that comes together in a unique product of its sorts. And that's Netflix for you. But Netflix is not focusing on, it's just, oh, I would just leave it at recommendations of products. I'll just leave it recommendations of videos, etc. Right? They're looking at the holistic experience, the same experience that you would get when you go to a movie theater of sorts, or when you go and have a cinematic experience. That's user experience for all of you folks. Right? Moving on, now this experience cannot be done overnight. It needs to be focused from an iterative manner. Launch after launch, testing, validating, going to the product backlog, figuring out what needs to be done, building those experiences, validating it. All of that is part of your continuous iteration process. All said and done, you will ask me, all right, all this is great. Talk is cheap. Show me some tricks. Show me some tips. Walk me through some experiences, folks. And here is where I start my journey with all of you today. You fundamentally ask a question, how do you do all of this at the very outset of it? What does empathy really mean from a user-centric perspective? Right? How do you really bring in an understanding of what your users require? So where do you really begin is there are four most important aspects. If you take the example of Netflix that I gave a while back, it's the context. What context does your user belong to? What is the situation that he is using your product? And where is that product being used? Is it on the way where you're walking on the street, where something is ASAP, you need to make quick actions? Or is it when you're binge watching? Your context and the situation where you are have a huge impact in terms of how you look at this. At the same time, you need to understand the motivations. What are the drivers that make your products be more usable of sorts? And in the spirit, when you club all of these, we've carved out four quick rules that you all can start with. And as I said, it's a journey. And when you talk about it as a journey, you need to look at one step at a time. How can you bring transformation for your teams, for your organization, or for your product that you're building? And if you're not using these philosophies, how do you really bring those in as well? The first thing first. And here is my first, and all these rules that I'm sharing with all of you today come off sheer experiences that we are working at Accolite, and how do we bring these practices to life of sorts. The first thing that we have observed is we have to empower everyone to be a designer. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone needs to know design as if it's UI. As I said, design is not what it looks. It is about how it works. So right from be that QA engineer in your team to that engineer to the junior person in your team needs to appreciate the why aspect. Why you're doing this? What is the problem statement that you're building? Because when you do that, you're able to write far better test cases. You're able to write far better. You're obviously, as a team, you have a better understanding of what is the product looking like. Why you're building what you're building. What's the function like? Why are you writing that particular function? Is it adding value to you? So from a developer perspective, from an engineering point of view, all of it comes together and gives you a feel, and it gives you an understanding of what the product is. It's the first foremost thing that we've observed, that when you get everyone in your squad to focus from a design perspective and figuring out why you're solving what you're solving for, you're going to be far more matured as a product team. And when you do that, your product team evolves and is able to create that experiences that you are looking for. It's not one person's responsibility. It's not the product owner's responsibility or the product manager's responsibility. I genuinely believe, it's purely my opinion, that it's the entire squad that needs to come together, right? and make sure that there is alignment. While there are alignment at the product level, we need to understand why you're building what you're doing. If you don't, you're missing out a huge trick. All right. So bottom line, empower. Get everyone to start thinking about what you're creating and how you are looking at it. That's the first thing that we have observed. The second rule that's observed is when I'm doing all of this, or when we are looking at it from a product perspective, it's not easy to say that, okay, I'm going to get all my team members to ask. There are people who feel that change is difficult, and change also includes disruption. So how do you marry it together? How do you make sure that when you are building a particular product, you are ensuring that your product success metrics is looked at the same time, how do you employ change and disruption in a way which is not too, I would say, fearsome of sorts, right? Like, why fear? I mean, obviously change brings in fear. There's a fear with change, but the fear of what? Can you learn fast in your product journey? Absolutely. But how do you employ that change? And one simple measure that you can all imbibe onto and you can pick up on is figuring out the product's aspects, testing the product. Even before you start on your path to engineering a solution, are you able to test with your customers? Are you able to test with your clients and saying that, hey, this is what we've understood through the journey. Is this in alignment with what you're looking for? And as you discuss and as you talk about the larger product, you're able to churn out a couple of things. You're able to churn out an understanding of product in the wider ecosystem with your stakeholders, with your customers. At the same time, you're able to churn out your key performance indicators. That what is the performance indicators that your customers' product will be living and breathing for. Right? And this sort of iterative approach and this sort of change will help you get to a more frictionless community and give you more path. You can I keep calling it, it's your path to innovation of sorts, right? So that's the second rule. And that's what we have observed, that while change is difficult, if you make it a habit by doing this practice of testing, by doing this practice of evaluating what is being presented, what is being developed, sprint by sprint, product launch after launch, all of this only helps you pivot to a better product. And then, as we keep saying, that it's the customer first. A lot of times when I started the journey myself, it's very easy to jump to solutions. It's very easy to say that, hey, I am very intrinsic about, I know technology, I can throw in best of the technologies to solve this problem. But then are we doing the right thing by putting solution first lens and not looking at what your customers need? And how do you really do that? Right? And that's where there is that science, and that science is simple, right? We've all talked about design thinking. We look at that 5 stages of design thinking in general, right from empathy to defining the problem statement. So what we are saying is, even before you define the problem statement, you're actually having conversations with people who live and breathe these experiences, right? And if there's a pattern that is coming, and I'm pretty sure that through these conversations, you will build a pattern. And when you're able to build a pattern, you're able to define a problem statement. And if you're able to define a problem statement, you're then able to better ideate on that problem statement. Correct? And when you're able to ideate on the problem statement, you're reaching to a solution which can be tested with your customer. And you're doing this in an iterative fashion. Right? That these are your 5 steps that you're doing. And obviously the industry has looked at it in very different ways, right? You could look at it as 5 steps, or you could make it so simple. You could say, hey, look, understand, make. That's also a simplistic way of looking at things. But what you're doing is you're being empathetic to the problem statement. You're figuring out what you're doing at the forefront of it, and then jumping to the solution aspects. But then solution and the ecosystem does not stop here. What you're focusing on is, as you jump on, or as you continue on your journey, you're talking about what is the product, what is your first sprint looking like, or what's your initial goals of the sprint. And then moving on, while your engineering team is focusing on building that first sprint and all those, the good engineering aspect, your product team is really focusing on building the product backlog, ensuring that your product is tested, the features are tested, all of that prioritization is done. You keep doing sprint after sprint till the experience evolves, till the experience is changing. Because it's not the aesthetic design that we are looking for. It's one, bringing in a culture by putting a practice where you're doing design first in every sprint of your engagement. And that's a food for thought for all of you. Are you doing that today? Are you looking at your sprint and taking sprint by sprint a view of what is being delivered to your customers? And is that product getting tested? Is it getting validated? It's not easy, but there are simple tricks and tips to doing that as well. And the simplistic way of doing that is, in your product team, start asking questions. Even before, if you're an engineer, ask yourself, why are you doing this? Right? Spend an hour or a cycle of sorts to figuring out why you're doing what you're doing, and have a view of your understanding, because if you understand that, you will end up engineering a far more better product. That's from an engineering perspective. From a product perspective, you're looking at that entire view of what the product should be. Am I talking about experiences here? Right? Have I gone into customer shoes and looked at the journey in general? Have I appreciated the issues and the challenges? Am I removing the speed bumps that they are facing? Because if your product is not solving the speed bumps, then your product is not solving the customer's experience, neither it's solving the problems. Right? It's not solving a problem, it's only giving a product, and that experiences is not going to be worth, and you're looking at a product which may not succeed. Right. Now, so that's third, right? That always focus on customer first and bring in these practices like design thinking. There's double D of sorts. There are a lot of frameworks that are available. Start engaging first with your customers and see how transformation happens for you. Right? And when I talk about double D, just to give you a feel for it, it starts with understanding all the problem statements, nailing down on one. But at the same time, once you've nailed down on that one problem statement, you're then expanding on that to figure out what are my solutions and nailing down that solution. So it's discover, learn of sorts, be it in the problem space or in the solution space. And you start with the problem space by keeping the customer first. Okay. And the last rule I've generally followed is never lose out on the big picture. There is a tendency that as the product starts evolving, we miss the big picture. Why your product has been successful initially cannot be ignored as you go through, because hey, now when a product is launched, I'm seeing more business traction, I'm seeing more revenue coming through. But as if you look at it, right, the Gen Zs are coming, the millennials are coming, the industry is changing, the thought process is changing. We're more digital now than we were before. If all of this is changing around you, sure, the customer is also changing. The customer's thought process is changing. But a fundamental question arises that, hey, do I have budget to do this? Right? And this is where I keep saying that it's not about the budget, it's about what those experiences are and how critical are those experiences to your product and how critical are those for your stakeholders. But if you don't bring it up, and if you're not open to having a conversation with your stakeholders, you're basically shutting down your process of thinking big picture. All right. And that's where I keep saying it. The holistic view is so very important, whether you're a brand, you're a product, you're getting into building something, but that big picture view is absolutely paramount. Now, with these 4 rules, a fundamental thing that we have observed now, we've implied these 4 rules at Accolite. And what we've observed is we've been able to touch on these experiences for customers across various industries. And what we've observed is whether be it in the insurance space or in a compliance testing team for a global investment bank, or it could be a simple HVAC solutions. All of these start with customer first. When you do that, and when you focus on their journeys, they've been able to provide a product which not only changes how the users, or it doesn't change how the users start using the products, but also brings in a culture of design first in the teams that are building these. Right? People appreciate why they need to think from a customer perspective, why they need to do the big picture aspect. And to give you an example, with our insurance experience, we realized for our Gen Zs and millennials, in your journeys, wouldn't you want to be recommended a product which connects to you? Because as you grow, your insurance needs may differ. But that again, that insurance needs, how should I be able to capture? Right? And that's where things like simple things like empathy, figuring out what your needs, your pains, your desired outcomes, and doing this iteratively. When I say doing this iteratively, I don't mean saying, hey, I've spoken to you today, again doing it again in about 3 days from now. No, all I'm saying is we're doing this after a ecosystem has happened. So after a year or two, you've gone from your college days to your working scenarios of sorts. You've gone from an industry, you've changed an industry, right? Or you're going from school to college. Different generations have different needs. That's their first experience that we've observed, that when we look at holistically, we are focusing on experiences for a wider age groups. That's our thought process. Whereas if you look at the HVAC solutions, we've gone away from being reactive to proactive. We've technically said, hey, why do I need to book a particular service? Is there another approach where I can have a proactive way of looking at how HVAC industry behaves? Can we not install an IoT device, just to give an example, which emits what the status of the device is, and basis that, can I write algorithms which can say, all right, with this pattern of data that I'm getting, I'm able to define whether the device is operating at its effectiveness. And if not, does it call out to say that, hey, you need a servicing of such sorts. So move away from that reactive approach to saying, hey, I need a service for my HVAC product, to going ahead and making it absolutely proactive. All this can only happen when you bring in a design first, customer first approach. All right. And at the very end, what happens of all of this is, as leaders have said, we are democratizing the product. We're making everyone part of the process. Right? And this, you fundamentally ask, does this create more difficult, complex discussions, conversations? Absolutely, because we're humans at the end. Right? In a democracy, you will have some challenges, but you need to go by the facts. You need to make sure the decision makers open up, bring in that big picture aspect. Right? Can you look at process transformation first before a technology transformation? And by doing all of this, are you getting to a better, innovative, thought process, and a decision which you can support to? And the answer is absolutely. And with that, I want to take a pause and say all of you, come partner with us. Because if you think that transformation is a journey, we would like to be associated with it. And in that spirit, let's make a change. Let's make it easy. Let's co-create. All right. With that, thank you all for joining the conversation today. Really appreciate it. And if, as I said, it's equally important for all of us to be in this journey. And I look forward to you having a partner with Accolite in this transformation journey of yours. And take care, stay safe, and have a good day.